All right, so today we're diving into a classic, Pride and Prejudice. I mean, who hasn't at least heard of this one, right?
Right.
We're using the Barnes& and Noble Classics edition, first published back in 1813, but this edition's extras are from 2003. We're not just going to rehash the plot, but really dig into what makes Austen tick, what she's saying about people and society that still matters today.
Exactly. And to really get Pride and Prejudice, we got to time travel back to England in the late 1700s and early 1800s. It's Austen's world, right? So picture this. King George III starts acting, well, kind of crazy around 1788, and everyone's a bit on edge politically. Then, bam, the French Revolution explodes in 1789. Talk about shaking things up right across Europe.
It's a huge upheaval.
Well, yeah. And amidst all this, Mary Wollstonecraft drops this bombshell book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, in 1792. She's basically saying, hey, women are people too, and they deserve rights.
Yeah.
I mean, radical for the time. And then to really hammer home the point that things are changing, King Louis XVI gets executed in 1793. So yeah, lots of drama going on beyond just England, even if the novel focuses on, love and marriage and all that.
Right, so it's like this backdrop of, I don't know, anxiety almost, against which these characters are trying to find stability in their own lives. And what about Austen herself? I mean, she wasn't exactly royalty, but her family wasn't exactly nobody either.
True. Her mom was connected to the Duke of Chandos family, which is the big deal. And get this, her cousin was the goddaughter of Warren Hastings. He was the top dog in British India. And this cousin, she ended up marrying a French nobleman who, he lost his head in the Revolution.
Wow. So even though her family might have been a step below the Bennets, she was definitely familiar with how the upper crust operated. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's key to appreciating Austen's work. She used the social rules, the importance of reputation, the whole pecking order within the gentry and aristocracy. She wasn't born with a silver spoon, but she saw how the other half lived. And that gives her writing this incredible depth. And you see it right away. The book kicks off with this huge event. Mr. Bingley, a young bachelor, loaded, moves into Netherfield Park.
And who loses their mind with excitement?
Mrs. Bennet, of course. She's got one goal: marry off her 5 daughters, and Bingley is like, lottery ticket.
She doesn't waste any time.
Nope. And Mrs. Long, she's like the town crier, spreading the news faster than Twitter. But then you've got Mr. Bennet, the total opposite of his wife. He's witty, sarcastic, and kind of watches all the marriage chaos with amusement.
He seems more interested in poking fun at it all than actually helping his wife.
Yeah. He even jokes about giving his blessing to Bingley to marry whichever daughter he fancies, but he low-key has a favorite, little Lizzie. So we've got this hilarious family dynamic. The mom obsessed with marriage, the dad cracking jokes, and 5 daughters stuck in the middle.
And speaking of daughters, the first ball happens, and that's where we meet Mr. Darcy, Bingley's friend. But talk about making a bad first impression.
Darcy is the opposite of Bingley. Proud, aloof, basically thinks he's better than everyone, refuses to dance with Elizabeth, insults her looks. Well, she overhears him. It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, Mrs. Bennet instantly hates him.
Makes sense, right? But here's the thing. Even Miss Lucas, who's pretty level-headed, she says Darcy has a right to be proud, considering his social standing and all that. It's pride isn't always a bad thing in their world, especially if you've got the goods to back it up. So Bingley's the charming one. Everyone loves him. Darcy's the arrogant snob. And their visits back and forth to Longbourn and Netherfield really lay bare how this whole social game works.
Right, so the Bingley sisters, Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst, they're polite to Jane because Bingley's sweet on her. But they're super condescending to everyone else, especially Mrs. Bennet.
Oh, yeah, it's that classic snobbery, they're better than everyone else because they have more money. And Elizabeth, she sees right through them. She hates how fake they are, especially towards Jane, who's genuinely nice.
She calls them out on their BS.
Totally. And Charlotte, she's more pragmatic. She tells Jane to be more obvious about liking Bingley, to basically play the game. It shows how much pressure women were under to get married, their whole future depended on it.
And the younger sisters, Kitty and Lydia, they're obsessed with the militia guys in town.
Right. Meryton is the center of their universe. They go there to see their aunt, Mrs. Phillips, but really, it's all about those officers. And Mr. Bennet, he just roasts them constantly with his jokes.
Oh yeah, he finds their accession hilarious. So then Jane gets sick at Netherfield, and Elizabeth, being the awesome sister she is, walks all the way there in the rain to take care of her. Which, by the way, the Bingley sisters think is totally scandalous.
Oh, they were horrified. Mud on her clothes, hair a mess. How dare she prioritize her sister over looking perfect? And remember that bit about the library? Darcy says something about families neglecting their libraries, and as Bingley jumps in, all fake, praising reading. It's so obvious she's just trying to impress him.
So transparent. And Mrs. Bennet, she sees Jane being sick as an opportunity.
Oh, totally. She tries to keep Jane at Netherfield as long as possible, hoping Bingley will propose. She's even, awkwardly pushing him about how much better the country is than London. It's so cringeworthy.
She's not exactly subtle. Okay, so then we get two new characters who really shake things up. Mr. Collins and Mr. Wickham. Mr. Collins shows up at Longbourn, and, well, he's something else.
He's the heir to the estate because of this whole entail thing, which means if Mr. Bennet dies, the house goes to him, not the daughters. Talk about pressure on Mrs. Bennet, right?
Oh, yeah, that adds a whole new layer to her marriage obsession. But back to Collins. He's pompous, obsessed with his patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. He's constantly praising her, even when she's being awful.
He thinks she's amazing, even when she's clearly condescending. It's like he's blind to how ridiculous he is.
And then he does the unthinkable.
He proposes to Elizabeth.
Like right away, and she shuts him down hard. She's not marrying for money or convenience. She wants to be happy, which Collins clearly wouldn't provide. I love her line about not risking her happiness on a second proposal.
So sassy. But then Charlotte accepts his proposal after Elizabeth turns him down. And Elizabeth is just floored.
I mean, who wouldn't be? But Charlotte, she's all about practicality. She's got no money, no prospects. For her, marrying Collins is security, even if it means being miserable. It's really sad, actually.
Yeah, it shows how limited options were for women back then. Now, enter Mr. Wickham. Charming, handsome, and he's got this sob story about how Darcy wronged him.
And Elizabeth, she eats it up.
Oh, totally. Wickham says Darcy cheated him out of an inheritance. Elizabeth already dislikes Darcy, so this just confirms everything she thinks about him.
But even her aunt, Mrs. Gardiner, she's a little suspicious of Wickham. She thinks he's maybe too charming, you know?
Yeah, I was like, is this guy for real? It's a little foreshadowing, right? So the big ball at Netherfield happens, and Elizabeth and Darcy, they're forced to dance together. And sparks fly, but not the good kind.
Oh, their conversations are brutal. She's witty and sharp, he's stiff and can't take a joke. And Sir William Lucas, he's so awkward, congratulating them like they're a couple just because Jane's with Bingley.
Yeah, it was classic Austen humor right there.
Yeah.
And Miss Bingley, she tries to make Wickham look bad, telling Elizabeth he's the steward's son and that Darcy's always been nice to him. But it backfires.
Elizabeth just thinks she's jealous. Meanwhile, Mrs. Bennet is dropping hints to everyone about Jane and Bingley getting married. It's embarrassing.
She's so desperate to make it happen that she's ruining Jane's chances.
Yeah.
And Collins, he's still trying to get Elizabeth's attention at the ball, even though she clearly wants nothing to do with it.
Poor Elizabeth, she can't catch a break. And then the worst thing happens. Bingley, out of nowhere, leaves for London with his sisters and Darcy. Jane is crushed.
It's heartbreaking. And Elizabeth is convinced Darcy had something to do with it.
Of course. And then Miss Bingley writes these letters to Jane saying Bingley is into Darcy's sister and they'll probably get married. Elizabeth knows it's a lie, a way to keep Jane away from Bingley because her family's not good enough for them.
So manipulative. But Elizabeth, she still believes in Bingley's feelings for Jane. And in the midst of all this drama, Charlotte and Collins actually get married. Elizabeth is still shocked, but Jane tries to see the best in it. It really shows the difference between them. Elizabeth wants love, Jane wants everyone to be happy. Meanwhile, Wickham is still everyone's favorite, and everyone hates Darcy even more.
It's all based on lies. So Elizabeth goes to visit Charlotte at Hunsford, and she has this, well, interesting encounter with Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Oh, Lady Catherine. She is a force of nature, condescending, bossy, and expects everyone to worship her. But Elizabeth, she's not having it.
She stands up to her. And at Rosings, she runs into Darcy and his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam. And Fitzwilliam accidentally reveals that Darcy broke up a friend's relationship. Elizabeth immediately assumes it's Bingley and Jane.
And she's right. This just confirms everything she believes about Darcy. He's arrogant and interferes in everyone's business.
So they're at Rosings, tensions are high, and then Darcy does the most unexpected thing. He proposes to Elizabeth.
It's a train wreck. He's basically like, I love you, but you're so beneath me socially that this is a huge sacrifice. He even talks about the degradation of marrying her. So romantic, right?
Not at all. Elizabeth rightfully tells him off. She calls him out on his pride, his meddling, his treatment of Wickham. It's amazing.
She's not about to be someone's charity case. This is where we see Elizabeth at her strongest.
And Darcy, well, he's clearly shaken, so he writes her a letter, and this letter changes everything.
He tries to explain his actions. He says he truly thought Jane didn't care for Bingley. He admits he kept Jane's visit to London a secret from Bingley, but claims it was to protect him.
But the real bombshell is what he reveals about Wickham.
He tells the whole story. The gambling debts, the attempted elopement with Georgiana, Darcy's younger sister. Turns out Wickham is a con man.
Elizabeth is stunned.
Yeah.
She realizes she was totally wrong about both men. She's been blinded by prejudice.
This is her wake-up call. She sees how pride and prejudice have clouded her judgment. And she's devastated, not just for being wrong, but for misjudging Darcy so harshly.
And then, just as Elizabeth is dealing with all this, disaster strikes. Lydia runs off with Wickham.
Talk about scandal. It could ruin the whole Bennet family. Colonel Forster breaks the news and it's chaos. No one knows if Wickham even plans to marry her.
Mr. Bennet and Mr. Gardiner rush to London to find them. Jane and Elizabeth are beside themselves with worry. And then, guess who shows up at the inn where Elizabeth's staying with her aunt and uncle?
Darcy, of all people.
The timing couldn't be worse. Elizabeth is mortified, and a letter from Jane arrives just emphasizing how bad the situation is. But then Darcy does something incredible. He secretly goes after Lydia and Wickham.
He's trying to fix the mess, for Elizabeth's sake. Even though she rejected him, he cares enough to save her family.
Mr. Gardiner's letters reveal what happened. Darcy found them and paid Wickham off to marry Lydia. He even secured him a commission in the army. It's huge.
Darcy literally saves the day. It's a turning point for Elizabeth. She sees his true character, his kindness and generosity, and then the newlyweds return to Longbourn, and it's clear their marriage is a sham.
Lydia is still immature and clueless. Wickham is just, well, Wickham. Mrs. Bennet is thrilled she has a married daughter, but Mr. Bennet is not fooled.
He sees how disastrous this marriage is, and then Lady Catherine de Bourgh decides to make an appearance.
Oh, this is good. She barges into Longbourn and demands that Elizabeth promise never to marry Darcy. She even reminds Elizabeth that Darcy's supposed to marry her daughter. Can you believe the nerve?
Lady Catherine's all about control. But Elizabeth, she refuses to be bullied. She stands up to Lady Catherine and says she'll make her own choices.
She's come a long way from the girl who was swayed by first impressions. But here's the funny part. Lady Catherine complains to Darcy about Elizabeth's refusal, and it actually gives him hope.
Because it means Elizabeth isn't engaged to anyone else. Talk about an unintentional assist. And then, what we've all been waiting for, Bingley comes back to Netherfield.
And he and Jane pick up right where they left off. He proposes, she says yes, happy ending for them.
Finally, true love prevails. And then Darcy gets his second chance with Elizabeth. He proposes again, but this time it's different. He's humble, he admits he was wrong, and he asks for her love, not her hand in marriage.
And she says yes.
It's such a beautiful moment. They've both grown so much, and they finally see each other for who they truly are.
Of course, they need Mr. Bennet's permission. And once Elizabeth explains everything, how Darcy helped them, he agrees. Even Mrs. Bennet is happy. Mostly because Darcy is rich and important.
Typical Mrs. Bennet. So we get a double wedding, Jane and Bingley, Elizabeth and Darcy. But life isn't all sunshine and roses. They still have to deal with family drama.
Like Mrs. Phillips being embarrassing and Lady Catherine being, well, Lady Catherine.
But they work through it. And in the end, Elizabeth is so happy about her future at Pemberley, Darcy's amazing estate. It's a symbol of their love and their new life together.
So Pride and Prejudice, it's not just a love story. It's about so much more. Pride, obviously, prejudice, social class, the expectations on women, the importance of second chances.
And it shows how much we can grow and change. Both Elizabeth and Darcy start out so flawed, but they learn from their mistakes and become better people.
In Austen's writing, it's still so relevant today. We all have prejudices. We all make snap judgments. Her work reminds us to look deeper, to question our assumptions, and to be open to change.
It's a message that never gets old.
So here's something to think about. The most important journey in Pride and Prejudice isn't the one from Longbourn to Pemberley. It's the journey Elizabeth and Darcy make within themselves, facing their flaws and learning to be better. What prejudices are we holding on to? What's stopping us from seeing the world and each other clearly?
It's a great question for all of us.
And that's our deep dive on Pride and Prejudice. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We've got lots more literary adventures coming your way.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for being here.